Well, LM, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. And just to introduce you, LM Cooke, performer, writer, singer, and host of LM Music. And you were a really good friend of Danny's for many, many years and worked together on several projects, which hopefully we're going to cover in the next wee while. And how is it you guys actually met in the first place?
We actually met through shared love of music, and that was through the Gasp Radio Show, which was running. Well, actually, it wasn't the Gasp Radio Show initially. It was a show called CPR,
Hmm.
which was run by Stephen C. Davis down in Reading, and I guested on that a few times. And Dani was a listener. She was a listener right back from those very early times before it branched out into the more familiar Gasp Radio Show that people know about these days. Uh, the GASP shows and the CPR show were quite unusual at the time in that they were interactive. So we ran a live Facebook event at the same time as the radio show. Not many other shows did that at that point. But because Dani was listening, she'd join in. So we'd talk to each other through the Facebook events, the chat, etc. And that was really where we got to know each other from, not in person, but via the Ethernet, rather than anything else.
And I love a shared music, obviously, because I mean you've both got quite a broad but eclectic taste as well, and it's eclectic's one kind of word that often goes well with sort of like Danny's memory, I must admit. But beyond the sort of like the early days of the radio station, which led to later on to the gas stage at Phoenix Festival, etc. The you know where was it you first came together in person? Where did you first meet in the flesh, as it were?
I'm fairly certain the first meeting would have been at the Phoenix Festival,
Hmm.
which again was running for a number of years. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, there was a huge festival planned a few years ago called Altfest, and it got all sorts of people playing, from Marilyn Manson, who I know is a little bit out of favour these days, but certainly lots and lots of big names. And it also had a steampunk stage, which was being run by Dale Rolls from BB Black Dog. Now, Altfest was possibly so big that it actually got too big for itself and it folded before it actually managed to launch. Dale rescued the steampunk acts that were playing there and took them to a place in mid Wales, which I will struggle to pronounce.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but the Workhouse is the
Yes.
venue in mid Wales, and basically it was called the Phoenix Festival because it came from the ashes of Altfest. It was a rescue mission at the time. After that first festival, which Dani attended, Dale kept running them. And it was at the Phoenix Festival that I actually met her as one of the acts that would have been on the Altfest stage.
But you actually got to work together. I mean, Phoenix had such a fabulous sort of like all in it together type vibe going on, which I mean, it's a kind of a legendary festival now. Certainly the first one. It's there's a moment in steampunk history that marks what is steampunk. That first Phoenix Festival, the rising from the ashes, the tolerance, the comradeship, it all coming together and just being a fabulous weekend, kind of sums up steampunk. And the acts that actually performed there were fabulous. I mean, somebody was, I think it was Stephen that was saying the courtyard was just fabulous, even for acoustic sounds.
Mm. It certainly was. And one of the nice things about the Phoenix Festival is that complete diversity of acts,
Mm,
because Dani's act was effectively a nightclub act.
mm,
It was sort of the glamorous dresses, the sort of almost burlesque feel to it, very cabaret
mm,
kind. Well, cabaret Berlin, obviously, but a very cabaret feel to it. But in most festivals, that might not have worked because you're expecting rock bands, you're expecting mud, you're expecting grime. At the
mm,
Phoenix, it worked. It worked in the middle of the day. She did have to tweak some of the songs she was performing in the middle of the day, obviously, to make them suitable for families.
yeah.
Um, but it worked wherever it was placed. It was you used the word eclectic earlier, but it was an amazingly eclectic mix of different acts.
Mm.
Um, Everybody got on, as you say. Everyone pulled together. Everyone watched each other, which again you don't get at other festivals. And it became almost like a family thing over
Mm.
the years that it was running.
Well, quite you know, it's good that you say families. There's quite a few serious friendships and friendships that sort of like are so deep that can be, you know, construed as family relationships that have come out of it since. But you know, bringing people together. I mean, sort of like there was yourself and Dani who came together, and Gurdy Bird as well, Tamsin, and that came led to live performances, not just at the Phoenix Festival, but it led on to the Medieval Biatches, and I'm so glad that I can pronounce that. Just saying, just saying.
Yes, well done indeed. Yes, actually, the first performance of the Medieval Biatches was at the Exeter Festival, which they have every year at Christmas time, sort of in December. And at that point, we only had one song. We'd got the Gurdy Bird. Tamsin had written a song called God Rest Ye Merry Wicker Men, which was based on, obviously, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, but she'd added a lot of folk horror type themes to it to make it link to the Wicker Man film. But that didn't have any lyrics. So I wrote some lyrics for it, just sort of randomly at one point, and we kind of discussed them and said, you know what, we ought to do this. So we dressed up a bit in sort of white outfits, myself and Dani, with the masks to look like the Wicker Men characters, and got up on stage during Tamsin's set and sang along with her for that one track. And that was our debut performance, totally unrehearsed. So a bit tricky to manage, but we got away with it, and people wanted more, obviously, so that was nice.
Excellent. And it kind of led into, I mean, I know it's popular on Gasp, and it's on the Absinthe Affair, it's certainly one of the most called for tunes, requested tunes that I get asked to play. A certain little number that involves a fox who goes on a duet. You know the very one I'm talking about.
I do know the very one you're talking about. Again, that's a Tamsin special. So it's Gurdy Bird featuring the Medieval Biatches.
Yeah.
And we had quite a lot of fun trying to record all of the backing vocals, because there's about 7 or 8 different layers in the chorus, and all of those voices are me and Dani. So we're trying to coordinate the harmonising, and bearing in mind also that Dani and Tamsin both lived in Cornwall, and I was in the Midlands, and actually we didn't get together very often, so everything had to be done virtually and sort of sent across and then checked and realised that you're not quite in tune, so you have to redo it. So it is a little bit tricky at times.
I mean, that's one of the things that's maybe a wee bit unusual in some ways about the steampunk community. I mean, a lot of friendships are online friendships, but there is also the festival and event meet-up elements, which are, it's almost like Christmas several times a year where families get together.
That's absolutely true, actually. And I mentioned earlier the Phoenix family. You go there and you see all the people that you haven't seen for ages, and you just carry on talking to them as if nothing had ever happened, you know, as if there'd been no time in between. And I think, I mean, this is a slightly off-topic note, but I think that's what made some of the lockdowns so hard in the previous year, because that bit of interaction that you had with your friends had gone. And okay, you still got online interactions, but you couldn't know when the next time you were actually going to see anyone was. So it was quite difficult.
The online side of things, I think, you know, thank God we lived in the age of the internet. I can't imagine what this must have been like in 1918 when we had the last big pandemic. But there was a lot of people putting a lot of good music online. For example, Frenchie and the Punk.
Yes.
And they were doing some fabulous sets, and they'd do this amazing rendition of Hey Hey Cabaret, and they'd finish into silence. And that is something that took me a long, long time to sort of like get my head around, because it just seems so unnatural. Because you get so caught up in what they were doing. And then where, you know, if you know, at the end of a live gig, everybody would be going ballistic. You know, it was like tumbleweed sort of like rolling through your headphones. I mean, it was crazy. Yeah.
It is. It was very, very difficult. I did a few live events myself, and I did a book launch, in fact, at one point and you have no idea if anyone's actually listening to you or not. So you just keep ploughing on and hoping for the best, and you probably look like a bit of an idiot, to be honest, because you're just kind of chuntering away, and you must be looking in all directions, waiting for a reaction that's never going to come.
I know exactly what you mean with doing sort of like some of the recordings that I've been
Mhm.
doing recently. But it's great that you mentioned sort of like the writing element, because you and Danny also shared the fact that you're writers.
That's right, yes. Dani was published in a couple of the same publications that I'm in, actually. There was a short story collection called Airships and Automata, and there was a collection of flash fiction, very, very short stories called Steam Flashes. And on that one, she wrote about one of the goddesses, I think, of Nepal. Um, which was, a lovely little story. And she was very keen. She was working on some stuff. Obviously, we've spoke little bit about Cabaret Berlin already, and I'm sure people who are listening already know this. But Cabaret Berlin was set in the kind of war era. And had a lot of the sort of songs, etc., that linked to that going on. And her writing was set in a very similar period, some of it. And it's a shame now that will never come to fruition.
It is a kind of sort of like one of the tragic elements among so many tragic elements. I mean, it's hard to actually sort of like believe it's actually 2 years already since her passing, and what a it's the usual thing when sort of like people pass away. It's not until they're gone that you actually realize what an influence and what a brightness they actually brought into the world. And certainly with some of Danny's outfits, the sort of like the glorious red and the sort of like the vibrant green sort of like ball gowns that she used to wear, and the one of the elements of the medieval biatches was the masks that you used to wear, and I've always been curious about that. If you don't mind, I'd like to. Can you say a wee bit about that? Because I'm incredibly curious.
Yes, of course. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the first song was the Wicker Man song, and the final scenes of the Wicker Man film, the villagers are all dressed up wearing masks as they burn Edward Woodward alive, as you do.
Yeah.
So that was our first idea for dressing up, and then the masks and the kind of the medieval look kind of stayed with us a bit. And we stuck also with folk horror themes, so I think the masks worked very well with that. So we had songs about Cthulhu, we had songs about a Cornish demon called the Owl Man, songs about slimy deep ones and all of that kind of stuff in the sea. Most of them were rewritings of traditional songs. One of the ones that people liked a lot was called Cheese Sleeves, and that was based on Green Sleeves originally, and was about the trials of eating cheese whilst dressed in medieval clothing with long billowing sleeves and a very tight bodice. So we kind of played up to that a little bit, but we looked more sinister than the songs actually were. The songs were a little bit light-hearted, I think it's fair to say.
Excellent. Well, I noticed I'm making plans to go down to Raising Steam in 2022, and I noticed that your name happens to be on the billing for it. Is this going to be a sort of like a DJ set, or is it sort of like the live performance as your singer performer?
It's a live performance as a singer, and I'm also doing some tarot readings throughout the weekend as well.
Oh, excellent.
So I should be about for quite a while during the weekend.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a fabulous weekend, and I think it's going to be very poignant with Dani having been booked to perform at the one before our passing. So it's. I think there's going to be quite a few sort of like wee personal tributes made to Dani at the time, and I know Feline is planning on sort of like leading off on My Girl's Pussy as a bit of a sing along at one point, which I think is going to be absolutely fabulous, and I hope we can all get together for that. But I'm really looking forward to meeting up with you in person at that time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you tonight, and hopefully you can join us in person on the 31st. because people listening to this are obviously realise that this is a pre-recorded thing. Feline and Strange are going to be performing as well. But I think folk are going to really enjoy this wee conversation that we've had, and it's been lovely to hear more about. I'm going to say it one more time because I'm so proud. Medieval by Atches. LM, pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed.